Hey, good afternoon. I'm Mike, and I'm your host of Insider Secrets. And that's brought to you by My Core Intentions. You know what? Let me ask you a question. Have you been thinking a little bit more about your why and what really matters for you in your real estate business and your personal life? If you're looking for some direction, My Core Intention wants to help you with exactly that. We want to help you discover your why and help you design to live a more balanced lifestyle. My core intention delivers proven real estate strategies through personalized coaching to help you facilitate a positive life change, personally and business. So I'd like to hear from each one of you with your practical plan for personal growth and what your intentions are and how you set those daily and weekly. If you're considering coaching and we can help, give us a call. We'd like to set a free coaching session for you to walk through your why and help you maybe refine it a little more and see what your execution plan is like. This way you can spend more time on things that are really important, like family and building relationships. So today, let me introduce our guest for you. Today I'm joined by my friend and real estate investor from beautiful San Diego, California, mzau. Michael's a seasoned real estate investor, and we were just having a conversation before the call started, and I was mentioning to Michael that I had a friend years ago who said he loved to live in San Diego, but the problem was he couldn't always make his mortgage payment. I don't think that that's Michael's problem today. See, Michael, being a seasoned real estate investor, has a very impressive history. We're going to come to you with a little bit different twist today on his multifamily strategy. It may give you a little pause, actually, when we think about it. We're going to explore building wealth in 2 to 4 unit properties. And you guys know that I've been talking a lot lately about creating wealth in small multifamilies. Well, Michael's going to give us a great perspective on this real estate investing strategy. His background, it's in economics and finance, and they play a really deep role in his investment strategy. So we're going to get Michael today to talk about his focus and his focus on his business, along with the market conditions and where he sees the market going. And we got a special treat for you at the end. But Michael, I'd like you to introduce yourselves to our listeners today and give us one word that best describes you and your investment strategy.
Okay. Profit. How's that sound?
Profit.
Yeah.
That's good.
And I like to preface the word profit or profitable is really, it goes down to a philosophy. It's starting with the end in mind. And because if there was really just one thing that I wanted to look at, as I look to mitigate a lot of my risks by starting with the end in mind. And so knowing that real estate in itself, in my opinion, is an investment that goes 10 plus years when it comes to a hold. I think in what I tell other investors who approach me or even clients of mine, and they say, well, what do you think is going to be happening? I said, well, I believe that over the course of 10 to 20 years, that the value of real estate is going to increase. Because if you are looking for a 3 to 6 month strategy, I'd consider that gambling. And there is some gamble. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I've flipped properties before, so it's not like I'm not oblivious to market conditions. It is something though that I look at, because when it's really, if you see the value in property, as you already know, you always make money on the buy.
Right.
And so knowing that, when you know that you're going to be making on the buy and you can mitigate a lot of the cost issues that are involved, then profit is definitely something that I've been blessed enough to have on the majority of my transactions.
Absolutely. And I love that word profit, and I have to say, you're probably the first investor that I have done a podcast with who has said profit. Here's the other thing you said that I really like is the end in mind, right? Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, really talks about that. He says you have to keep the end in mind, right? I actually wrote a book that'll be coming out this fall called Exit Plan.
Wow.
And I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years on real estate training and seminars and coaching. And to be left empty where people don't talk about getting out of the deal. They talk about going into the deal and how to find it and how to secure it, but nobody ever talks to you about getting out. And I think exiting the deal is such an important strategy. So here's what I'd like you to do. Would you talk to us a little bit about your backstory? Because I know that, coming from finance and, where you came from, you have a little bit different backstory. And what got you into real estate and how did you wind up getting attracted to it? So.
Wow. Well, I don't think anybody, well, there's a few people, but I certainly didn't go to college thinking I was going to end up in real estate. I actually wanted to, by the end of my junior year to the beginning of my senior year, my expectation actually was to be to start as a runner at the Chicago Merc. and really to be a trader or some kind of fund manager in the future. So to enter into real estate finance was purely by accident. That was actually a choosing of my wife when she says, "Oh, I'm not moving anywhere outside of San Diego." And so I said, "Oh, well, I guess I'm going to have to stay in San Diego then." And so I actually couldn't find employment. It was just after the S&L crisis, and it was really challenging, even with a degree. And actually, I had several pretty meaningful experiential internships with a few life insurance and finance companies working on financial analysts and accounting, and I just couldn't find employment. So I found a job as a debt collector, collecting on delinquent medical bills, bounced checks, just things like that. And I thought, this is like the worst job like I could have. But what I didn't realize, the blessing that I received behind that, was how beneficial it was going to be for me to learn about skip tracing, to learn about how people are going to work with debt collectors when it comes to the mindset of that, how you can work, and because that eventually came into fruition as I began to learn how to talk to my tenants.
Okay.
And even some of the landlords are like, "Well, this tenant's gone," and this is for some of my other clients, and I'd be like, "Oh, well, let me find them." And they're like, "What?" I know how to skip trace, which is something that a lot of loan officers just don't know how to do, and which is my day job. So I ended up being a collector, and then one of my colleagues who left being a collector, became a loan officer, calls me and says, "Hey, I know you're good at what you do, but being a loan officer is going to be even better. Instead of collecting from them, you get to loan to them or give them money." And I said, "Well, okay, how much does it pay?" And then he told me, "Well, sign me up." And so it got me into becoming a loan officer. And actually, I started off at a thrift and loan, which is virtually non-existent now.
Right, exactly. So listen, some of our listeners might not understand that terminology, skip tracing. Can you give them a 30-second explanation about what that is?
Sure, no problem. If you can't find somebody, you're going to have to find resources to find them. Nowadays with the internet, you can Google their name and you can find various resources. If you have access to a credit report, you can get an address, you can get a phone number, you can get previous employers, you can get present employers. So and in certain circumstances, you can even get family members. And so to have accessibility on how to find people, I didn't think it was a skill that I was ever going to use again, but it served its purpose well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. When you have somebody move out and you get a judgment against them, or you have a problem where they owe you money and you have to get a judgment or you evict them, learning how to skip trace and learning how to find them is a valuable skill. So, so I know that your focus is around 2 to 4 unit properties, and you do that right in San Diego. So I'd like you to explain that whole strategy, because the price point on a 2 unit or a 4 unit in San Diego is a little bit different than it is in the city of Chicago. And I'd like you to kind of talk about that a little bit, because most markets aren't like San Diego.
Yeah. Most cities don't have the temperate weather that San Diego has. and I like to, and the reason I say that in context is because well, San Diego, Los Angeles County, Orange County, or even Marin or the city of San Francisco is very similar in nature, in the fact that when people look at investment, and it really has an opinion and a mindset of what do you want to accomplish with your end in mind. And my end in mind, number one, I want to mitigate my taxes for the present while getting cash flow. And then number two, I want to be able to get appreciation in mind, because I believe in having mitigated debt, meaning that if you've ever listened to or read the Bigger Pockets website, they have that BRRRR method. It's the buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. And in areas where you have high degrees of appreciation over a longer stretch of time, I can look at that and go, well, my rate of return on my actual cash flow might only be 2 to 4%. But one of the numbers that I use that's really an underutilized math term is an internal rate of return. An internal rate of return, of course, meaning that if you start with the end in mind, what is your cash flow at the end, or what are you going to use over the course of time? And so if you use the BRRRR method of refinancing over the course of time, well, San Diego, at least over, and what I tell my clients, at least over the last 60 years of history, from 1950 or 70 years now, since 1950 to the present, we've seen a tremendous amount of appreciation. So refinancing and taking out your cash, taking out cash as a refinancing option every 10 years or every 7 to 10 years is a viable option. It becomes, it increases your cash back to you. And so if cash back to you is a part of your overall rate of return, if you use internal rate of return and use the cash out on your refinance every 7 to 10 years, knowing that you're going to cash flow every single time, then I believe that your rate of return exponentially increases past what Chicago, Cleveland, Atlanta, or other cities that I've seen people want to go out of state for. And I think that if you're looking at a long-term hold, knowing that you're going to be refinancing, well, last time I looked at my tax return, also, the depreciation also ends at a stopped period of time. And so because you only have 25 years of depreciation, I'm looking at I want to be able to reduce the amount of taxable income I have while also keeping as much as I want. So buying 2 to 4 units makes it an easier refinancing option, number one. Number two, I get to, when I do refinance, I can utilize that cash for other investment purposes or personal purposes. And number three, with the values increasing, at least historically over the last 70 years, and knowing that it's starting with a 10 to 20 year hold period in mind, it becomes a much more viable plan. And so, and not only that, the financing is easier to get 2 to 4 units as well than it is to get 5+ units. As an individual, you can do that. And actually, as an individual, depending upon whether you did it in your name or whether you did it as an LLC, if you had it as an LLC with family as an LLC, you can actually sell your entity, right? And all the debt comes with it. And so you sell the entity, and then now you have an entity that's cash flowing and producing some rate of return. And if you sell the entity, you don't have to worry about the refinancing because there's no title changing hands. And, sure. and in California, you have a law, it's called Proposition 13, which was passed in 1977. So your property taxes don't change. So if you bought your property, for example, in 2008, and you bought it for, let's say I actually bought a duplex here in San Diego for $250,000. My property taxes stays at that $250,000 base. Even though that duplex is now $700,000, it didn't go from $2,000 to $8,000-9,000 as it would into other states. It stays at the $2,800 level and increases, I think, at anywhere between 3 to 10%, depending upon the municipality that it belongs to.
And is that an annual 3 to 10% increase?
It could be. It could be. And when the market goes down, it also decreases.
So let me ask
think
you
about this way.
Here's one thing I'd like you to explain. Explain
Sure.
to our listeners the difference between ROI and IRR. Because there's a difference, and a lot of people don't understand that difference, right? They look at IRR and go, what is this? So can you explain to them?
Sure. I'm going to make it as simple as possible then. ROI is we have an expectation is we invest a certain dollar amount, and let's say it's 10%. If you invest $100, your expectation is 10%. Your expectation is going to be out of $100 is going to be $10. That's ROI. That's your rate of return. With internal rate of return, and let's say you have a 7-year period of time until you refinance into your next refinance period, it's going to not only take the cash flows, it's also going to take your lump sum and then utilize that as an internal rate of return. Whereas you might say that your rate of return is X, but then when you have cash flows over the course of a period of time, you're going to and other expenses, then your internal rate of return is going to be different from your actual rate of return. I hope that helps, because without a piece of paper and showing someone on a whiteboard, that's the best I can do for now.
Yeah, and that's good. That helps bring some clarity to it. The other thing that I like that you talk about is the refinance piece, right? And I think that when we have the ability to refinance and pull some capital out of a property, and we can do that tax-free and use all the money during that, that's one of those exit strategies, right? So when we talk about exit planning, as we did early on in the call, is that's one of those strategies that allows us to access capital, to use it all to go buy another property or do something else with, right?
Absolutely. And you take into consideration what's happened specifically in Southern and Northern California, and a property that you like, for example, the duplex that was purchased for $270,000, which is now worth $700,000. I can in fact, I'm going through a refinance right now, and go up to 70% on cash out on that duplex as an individual, 7 times 7. So I can go up to $490,000, get all of my original investment back, and have $200,000 to utilize for the down payment of my next unit in the event that we come to a down market, in the event. And it remains to be seen on whether we're going to have a down market in real estate at the moment, even with the pandemic circumstance. However, that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. And so when that happens, or if that happens, then at least I'm cash rich. And with today's low interest rates in the 3% range, which is lower than it was 10 years ago, it'll still cash flow.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Tell us a
truly
little bit how you source deals. What's your best tools for finding properties that make sense to buy?
Well, for the 2 to 4 units, I'm a very unconventional thought process person. So I utilize bankruptcy attorneys and fiduciaries.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've ever heard that strategy before, but especially it works in areas where there's appreciated values, such as San Diego, what happens is you have someone, they don't earn enough income. You mentioned that you said that San Diego is a great place to live as long as you can make your mortgage payment.
Okay. Right.
To really play upon that, really as more of a matter of fact, bankruptcies do happen because they can't afford their mortgage payment. And the bankruptcy laws, at least here in San Diego, specifically state that if you have too much equity inside of your property, you'll be forced to sell your property. Mm. And for me as a for-profit organization, and I do explain that to the sellers and to the bankruptcy attorney, I'll provide a way for them, instead of being in distress or stress emotionally, I'll provide a way for me to acquire the property at a profit, cash flow, because typically also because of their emotional state, their physical living conditions just aren't as well kept up as a lot of people. So I'll offer to fix up their living conditions and offer to fix up the residence while they're living in the residence, as long as I own a contract. That's the key. As long as I own the contract to purchase, then I will do everything I can to make their life better, and make their they're already going to a bankruptcy attorney to begin with. So if I can offer to make their emotional life better, make their credit life better, make their cash life better at the same time, a lot of these people who live in San Diego County who own a duplex, threeplex, or fourplex have a willingness to sell because they're so bad in their emotional state they can't even keep their tenants.
Yeah, yeah. So what it sounds like is you built some good relationships with some attorneys or
Yes.
the fiduciary who's on the bankruptcy side, or maybe any trustees or people like that, or
I made some friends here in
yeah,
California. Not only do I own multifamily, I actually own some notes as well.
okay,
And so I can't help it. I've been in the mortgage industry now for almost 25 years. And
sure,
so unlike the traditional loan officer who's just looking to get you at the best interest rate, I actually, as a student of the industry, I really looked to understand what it meant to be an investor of mortgages and so on. And so diversifying my real estate, not only into 1 to 4 multifamily, but also into notes helps me as an investor.
okay, all right, great. So here's what I'd like you to do. Talk to us a little bit about your planning. One of the things I talk to our listeners a lot about is pre-planning, exit planning, you know, and that's all fine. We can write these glorious plans, but then it comes down to execution, right? So I'd like you to talk a little bit about your planning strategy and then your execution strategy and how you keep yourself true to your plan.
Sure, no problem. Well, I wrote down a goal about 10 years ago to have about 200 doors to my name here in San Diego. If anybody, if any of your listeners truly understand San Diego, I think most of them do, to get to that number in 2 to 4 residences can be a challenge financially if you don't, if you just think that you need to come up with all this money. But with my strategy is that I do have, that number gets me to amount to not only to where I can live and also pay my taxes on that income that I have, but also it can sustain itself for years to come. And so I'm not really looking for an exit strategy because that specific goal allows me to have enough cash flow to continue acquisition, not only in its system of how to acquire, not only in its system of cash flow, but also in a systematic way that in the event that my children, my grandchildren, or my great-grandchildren don't want to be in real estate, still provides them with the liquidity and an exit strategy, and even more so, a value strategy that I've written out for them on the execution of how to keep the cash flow. Because if they're in my, just a quick secret, in my trust and in my wishes, I wrote that any heirs that I have, if they don't have a certain value system in mind when it comes to following the law, and I equated that into numerical value, then they just don't get a piece of the action.
Yeah, interesting, right? Yeah, so you got to be close.
Yeah, and so I've written out my exit strategy. My death strategy, however you want to say it, to really to have my heirs to inherit the cash flow, but even more importantly, to have a certain value system, and I've done that value system numerically in money and also in giving. And so if they're willing to give and also produce, then they can inherit.
Nice.
Uh-huh.
So if how do you evaluate along the way that you're on track? So, you talk about goals a little bit, and how often you go in and reevaluate those goals, take a look at your plan, say, I'm on track, I'm off track, I need to make adjustments. How often do you do that?
I actually do this quarterly,
Okay.
and um, it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
Because I have failed in my life. So just because I have some success now doesn't mean that I hadn't experienced failure in the past. And I think that it would be foolish to think that even though you have successes in your life financially, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have financial failures in some of the properties that you have, whether it's with a tenant or whether it's with a circumstance beyond your control. As I tell a lot of my clients and friends, money's not emotional. People are. And so when you're working with money and you're working with real estate and people and you're evaluating your goals, I think it's real important that you just don't get too introspective with your failures, and you get introspective with your successes so you can celebrate them and figure out what it is that you're doing right. And then not get introspective and depressed over what's going wrong, but really figure out what it is that you can learn from those lessons so that you don't do it again.
So that's a great segue, right? Because my next question for you is, what's been your biggest shaping moment of your career, right? So you're kind of talking about that right now. So if you had to look and say, this is the event that happened that was really shaped my career and where I wanted to go.
Well, I'll tell you, there's two of them, actually. The first one was because I actually didn't start investing, even though I started in the mortgage industry and real estate in 1996. I didn't start investing until 2009. And I remember in 2003 and 4, when a lot of my, as a mortgage broker, a lot of my clients were saying, you got to be an investor. You're in this business. How can you not know what's going on?
Right.
And as an economist, I looked at it and said, I have people and colleagues who they're reporting $20,000 of income, but their actual income is like $10,000 of income, and they're putting it on a loan application, getting a property they have no business in buying. There's no way that this house of cards can stack up.
Yeah.
And sure enough, when it came about, because I remember the people were in San Diego, people were financing commercial buildings for 5% down. And I mean, and we're not talking about like small 200, 300, 400,000. We're talking about like $2 million to $4 million properties.
So the over leverage really can hurt.
It really can if you don't understand the market conditions on how you can receive your rents. Because I think that a lot of my properties have been financed 100% in my joint ventures.
Yeah.
And that's because I buy with the end in mind, and you make money on the buy.
Yeah. So I like this interview with you because you continually open the next door as we're having this conversation. So you're talking about market conditions, right? So talk a little bit today about market conditions, like what you've seen pre-COVID. We're in this COVID virus season. We're not sure if we're coming out of it or if we're starting to come out of it. We're going to take back steps back into it, but what do you see in your own estimation, what do you think is going to happen in the next 90 days, 180 days, 12 months?
Oh, boy, that's real interesting. That's like asking me, what do you think the Federal Reserve is going to be doing with interest rates? Well, I'll answer it the best that I think I can. In specifically in San Diego County, the demand has been really brisk. There's been a limited amount of inventory. So whenever there's a limited amount of inventory, that's key number one to producing a seller's market. But even key number two is employment, and the hiring of San Diego has been fairly aggressive. And so because there's local companies here in San Diego, which is becoming a technology and biotechnology hotbed, companies like Qualcomm in the telephone industry and Dexcom in the biotech industry, they've increased in price and valuation, and so they've been hiring engineers and people to work here physically in San Diego, especially with Amazon and Google opening up centers here in San Diego, where it's cheaper in real estate costs than it is in Northern California. So demand has been fairly brisk. The people that are leaving San Diego have been lower income. That's a little bit of a concern for me right now, because you still need service-oriented people to work here, and so there's going to be a need for affordable housing. And so as more opportunities begin to open up by our local municipalities to open up affordable housing for service workers or lower income workers, or even higher density housing, it's just going to create more demand for that as well. So when we talk about 5+ units or 100+ unit apartment buildings, those are going to also increase in value accordingly as well. So in the next 90 days, I think it's going to be fairly brisk. 120 days, brisk. Rest of the year, also very brisk in San Diego. Nationwide, I don't see that happening. It's really hard. There's just not enough industrial production to support a household. It's just not. When you have an entire oil industry up in the mountains over by, was it North Dakota, South Dakota, and Idaho, supporting an oil industry, and you have people all over the United States that are working in that area, going back to their homes. I know of people here in San Diego, they were earning $200,000 a year in the oil industry, no college degree, just work in the fields, and they're not doing that anymore. Right. Same thing when it comes to fishing in Alaska. Yep. And so, and who's producing, when the slaughterhouses, or who's producing vegetable. I mean, when you just see the turmoil that's going on. So if there's no jobs available and there's no demand, and there's less demand as a result, in areas where there's no technology, we're going to see some downturn. In areas where there's going to be continued technological growth and the demand for those types of jobs, we're still going to see continued demand this year.
So do you think that we're going to see housing prices drop? Do you think that we're going to see any type of a glutton or even an uptick in foreclosure opportunities, things like that?
I think we learned the first time in 2008, at least in the mortgage industry, how to work through that glut, or glut. Being a note investor, I know of people right now, they haven't made a mortgage payment in 12 years. Still, the Fannie and Freddie, they're still working out through that glut, and they just, and to say that that's going to happen again, we'll see that, but really more on a regionalized basis. States like Florida have a different bankruptcy law function as well. So what we see in California, we haven't seen yet in Florida come into fruition. We haven't seen yet in the state of Georgia yet what's going to come into fruition. Same thing with Alabama. And so looking at bankruptcy laws, looking at how it affects not only individuals but corporate and LLCs, and when it comes to housing, will we see the foreclosures? Possibly. We're just not going to see it as frequently because because it's going to be more on a regionalized basis than a national basis. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, as we're starting to get close to the end, what advice would you give to a new investor today?
Boy, go get a mentor, go get a coach. And yeah, as a loan officer, I get a call or two or three a day. I want to get, I don't have the money and I want to get into this. Or some people I want to have money and get into this. And I've coached people with and without money, with zero experience. And I'd say, go get someone with experience. Not only someone that may have done the flip, but really someone who's been doing this for a while that really understands the number. I had someone that worked for TD Ameritrade as an analyst come to me, invested $100,000. Well, first he put $20,000 as a deposit into a 2-unit property here in San Diego. I told him, you got to walk away from that project. Leave your $10,000 non-refundable deposit. Yeah. And he went and invested it. And on paper, it looks like that he made a profit. Unfortunately, he withdrew the money from his IRA, so he had to pay the capital gains on it. So on paper, for the property, he made a small profit, but the actual he took a $30,000 loss.
Wow, interesting.
So having a financial mentor in mind is really not just for knowing how to flip or how to buy, but really starting with that end in mind, knowing for someone that really understands the finances, it's important that you work with the right tax people, the right finance people, and the right mentor, so that can refer you to those right people in mind.
And a good coach can help you build that team of people around you that can help your business thrive, right?
Absolutely.
So one of the things I said at the beginning is that we would save a little surprise for the end. So one of the things that I think we need to talk about with our listeners is you are an expert moderator for the game Cashflow.
I am.
Now, I know some of the people might not understand what that game is. So I'm going to just let you tell them about the game and tell them about the moderation. And I'm hoping that we're going to get a few phone calls after this and people are going to say, hey, let's set this up, because I'm really getting excited about doing an online deal with you. So.
Sure, no problem. So Sharon Lechter and Robert Kiyosaki developed the board game called Cashflow 101. They developed it, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, just before the book Rich Dad Poor Dad came out. And so the game just didn't sell that well. So when the book Rich Dad Poor Dad came out, it was used as a marketing tool to actually sell the game. And so for the last actually 15 years, but more so in the last 10, I've been utilizing the game as a moderator to play with the other people to teach them the skills of how to be an investor. Because you can read a book, you can go to a seminar, and you can learn as much as you want online. But one of the things that I mentioned earlier was money's not emotional, people are. And it doesn't matter how black and white you think you are, you're still gonna go with your gut or trust your intuition emotionally on how to make an investment decision. And so what I do in moderating the game is I really introduce the emotional element of how to make how to get a gauge of how you can judge yourself to make investment decisions.
It's a great learning tool, especially not only for a new investor, but a seasoned investor, because I think what it does is it causes you to take a minute and think about where you're at and how to achieve more or to back off if need be, right?
Sure, and when I moderate and at the board game, I'll teach the various lessons. For example, contracts create wealth is one of the lessons. And so in the game, I'll say, okay, number one, we only play as a joint venture. So the first thing we do before we start the board game is there's going to be 4 people playing, or there's going to be 6 to 8 people playing, and say everybody has to create a joint venture partnership with their partner, and we'll play with 4 teams or 2 teams. And so the first thing is creating a joint venture relationship. What is your responsibility? What is our goal in mind when doing the game? Are we doing just to buy and flip, or are we doing it for cash flow purposes? What is our end in mind? Yeah. The second lesson I would teach is the deal deck is always full, because we go through scarcity issues. We don't have enough money for borrowing. We don't have enough money for investing. We don't have enough deals to invest. And so I'll teach how to go to come to me as the moderator saying, okay, I don't have $120,000 for this $1.2 million apartment building in the board game. So what do I have to do? So I'll go and I say, well, why don't you make me an offer to do a seller carryback? Why don't you make me an offer as a lender? So I'll be the lender, I'll be the seller, and I'll help them negotiate to figure out what is it they can do to creatively enter into contracts and into how to make the acquisition. If you think you can't, or if you think you can, you're usually right.
Either way, right?
Right. And so creating those moments in the board game, whether it's a joint venture or whether it's a scarcity or whether it's a confidence or whether it's an abundance mindset, is something that I know how to introduce. And I've been doing this successfully, not only in person, but even more so as doing it as Zoom calls. I've had 40 to 50 people play on a Zoom call on one board at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's what's really neat about this whole thing, is that we can do this on Zoom. It can all be done virtually. And here's what even impressed me more is you said you could play a game in an hour.
That's right.
Where I've played the game, it's taken 8 hours. So you know what's interesting is the moderation piece of it, right? So you
Sure.
pushing it through. So
absolutely. When you play Monopoly or when you play any board game, you're sitting there going, well, well, guess what? In real life, we have contracts and we have escrow periods, 30 days or 45 days or even 15 days. And so I say, great, I'm going to read the card, and after the card is finished, you've got 30 seconds to make a decision. And so, okay, and then 30 seconds are up. All right, that's great. Your contract period is up. If you'd like to continue to think about it, that'd be fine. It's going to cost you $1,000.
nice.
And because that happens in real life as well. I need an extension on my escrow. Okay, well then the extension on the escrow is $1,000. And I've seen scenarios where, again, starting with the end in mind, where the joint venture partnership is at the selling scenario, and one partner says, we got to sell, we're making a profit here, and the other partner sitting there going, well, I don't know. I mean, is the value going to keep going up? I mean, I do like the cash flow. Okay, well, okay. Your seller, the buyer, wants to close escrow, and you're not prepared to sell. And guess what? A list pending to show up. The buyer wants you to pay for their closing costs for you to extend your escrow period as a seller.
Yeah.
And so there are different facets that I introduced as an experienced investor that I could bring to the buyer, so that to the players, so they understand that there's a consequence for everything that we do or don't do.
Yeah, interesting. Well, listen, I want to thank you very much for today. Today's been very
Thank you.
helpful, very informative. If any of our listeners want to get a hold of you, do you want to share your information, how they could do that, either to talk about cash flow or to talk about financing or talk to you about money? So
Sure, absolutely. They can email me. It's pretty simple, michaelzau@yahoo.com, michaelzau@yahoo.com. And if they'd like to send me a text message, they can reach me on my cell phone, 619-889-8817.
perfect. And we'll have that information on our website. Michael, again, I want to thank you for being here with us today. And it's, like I said, you've been very helpful, very informative. I think we've all learned a few things, and we look forward to talking to you down the road. Our listeners, I hope that this has been helpful for you today. And please, if somebody has an interest in playing cash flow, raise your hand, let me know, shoot me an email, shoot me a text, and we will put something together and get 20 of us, 40 of us on a Zoom call and have a blast. Everybody
Yes.
have a great day, and I look forward to working with each one of you. Bye-bye now.